My name is Sarah. I used to live with my two sons, but they're both growing up and becoming independent now. The first to leave home was my younger son, George. George proposed to a girl named Angela who he met at work. After 3 years of dating, he brought Angela home to introduce her to us. Angela was visibly delighted when she saw our house, being an architect herself. She mentioned her current studies in interior decorating, which sparked my interest. I decided to join her in learning about it. Having someone to study with at my age was a delightful experience. A month after George introduced Angela, my elder son Robert brought his girlfriend Karen, who looked about 5 years younger than him. Hello, Mel. We're planning to get married within half a year, so please prepare lots of congratulatory gifts, was her first remark. I tried to stay composed as she went on, but she kept bringing up money and asking about our house. I couldn't help but wonder if she was after our wealth. Robert didn't seem bothered. Instead, he proudly declared, "We're getting married before George does." I sighed inwardly, recognizing Robert's competitive nature. Robert and George are only a year apart in age, and I don't recall favoring one over the other. Yet despite our efforts not to show favoritism, circumstances were different. With wealth in our household, there were always those who sought to curry favor with Robert, believing he would inherit a significant portion. Sadly, some even disparaged George in comparison to Robert. Hearing this repeatedly, Robert began to internalize the belief that being the elder brother meant he had to surpass George in every aspect. As an adult, Robert became fixated on outdoing George in academics, the number of girlfriends, and even the number of friends he had. While I appreciated his dedication to his studies, both George and I were troubled by Robert's relentless need to compare himself, even in areas where it seemed unnecessary. I'm sure George brought Angela home as his fiancée to one-up me as the older brother, so we need to get married soon, Robert remarked, seemingly rushing to introduce his girlfriend. When I asked, "How long have you two been together?" Karen hesitated before saying, about 3 months. We've decided to get married in another 3. I was taken aback by this rapid progression. It seemed too hasty. Do you really want to compete with your brother like this? After Karen left, I found a moment alone with Robert. Robert, I see your old habits surfacing again. Wanting to marry before George is understandable, but the timing shouldn't be rushed. Marrying after just 3 months seems hasty. Have you considered living together first? I chose my words carefully, aiming not to upset him, but he seemed to take it as an attempt to undermine his wedding plans. Why are you always favoring George over me? You and Dad never treated me like the older brother, Robert retorted, suggesting he felt overlooked because we didn't overly privilege him based on birth order like others might have. We've never distinguished between them based on who came first. I've never thought about which one is more important. And do you really want to marry Karen? The one who demanded lavish gifts and showed too much interest in our house. Well, I know Karen might not fit the mold of what my overly serious mother approves of, but she's the fiancée I've chosen, Robert responded defensively. Why was Angela accepted so readily while Karen isn't? It's because Angela was polite and respectful. It's natural to be cautious of someone who doesn't show basic manners, I explained calmly. I thought I was being fair, but Robert disagreed, letting out a frustrated sigh. You clearly favor George over me, he burst out suddenly. But I'll marry before George, he asserted defiantly. Reflecting on the situation, I acknowledged my role as his mother and the missed opportunities to guide him better. Once they become adults, parents aren't obligated to keep looking after them, I mused aloud. Now that they're grown, I want them to stand on their own feet without depending on me. They're responsible for their choices and actions. I chose to remain silent and let the situation unfold naturally. One weekend while studying with Angela, the doorbell unexpectedly rang. To my surprise, it was Karen at the door. Despite not being informed of her visit beforehand, I welcomed her inside. Karen glanced at our study materials spread across the table and chuckled. Are you two really studying at your age? Did you both only finish middle school or what? And Angela, you're not even married to George yet, right? So you're here hoping to get some allowance from your future mother-in-law, Karen remarked bluntly, lacking any trace of politeness. Shocked by Karen's words, Angela quickly shook her head. Knowing Angela's character well, I was certain she wasn't there for any financial reasons. I placed a reassuring hand on Angela's shoulder and calmly looked at Karen. Please refrain from making such unfounded remarks. Angela and I are here to study. She hasn't asked for any money, nor how I offered any. In fact, knowing her character, she would decline even if I did, I stated firmly. Angela nodded vigorously in agreement beside me. She is sincere and respectful, unlike Karen. Angela wouldn't visit to insult others or bring up money matters. I have to wonder what Robert sees in Karen to consider marrying her. Karen appeared to sense my trust in Angela and without saying another word, finished her tea and cookies before promptly leaving. However, her unexpected visits continued. Whenever she knew Angela and I were together, she would arrive and mockingly comment on our studying. Could it be that, influenced by Robert, she was attempting to belittle Angela, who is set to marry George? If so, her attempts to mock us only reflect poorly on herself. In the end, I couldn't discern her true intentions, but to spare Angela from further distress, we stopped our study sessions at my home. Instead, we met at karaoke to study, occasionally singing songs, or spent time at coffee shops. However, when Karen noticed Angela no longer visited my house, she remarked, "Finally, that bothersome younger daughter-in-law is gone. By the way, you should leave this house. Robert and I will live here once we're married." Just as I thought she was content, she made the most outrageous statement. She demanded that I vacate the house. "Excuse me? This is news to me. I had no idea you and Robert planned to live here." "You see, mother-in-law," she continued, "you've been living comfortably as a parasite in this house because you were favored by your husband and taken care of by your first son, Robert, right? But now you favor your second son and his wife more than Robert. It's only natural that Robert would kick you out and refuse to support you anymore." True, Robert does spend a lot of time here, even though he has his own place. I handle the household, which makes things easier for him. George, on the other hand, enjoys cooking for himself since moving in with Angela. Perhaps Karen mistakenly believes Robert has taken over the house from my husband. Given how often he's here, she likely labeled me a parasite because she thinks my husband's travels mean I live a cushy life without working. Do you see where she's coming from, Mel? Your husband must be tired of you if you're suddenly studying and trying to get a job, Belle. At your age, you won't accomplish much anyway, Karen snapped, her tone accusatory. I was tired of Karen's assumptions and rude remarks. Explaining that I was studying for personal enrichment, not employment, would likely be futile. Seeing my silence, she seemed to think she had hit a nerve and added aggressively, "Stay out of our affairs, except for weddings and funerals." Honestly, I thought to myself, I have no desire to maintain any relationship with Robert. If he's serious about marrying this woman, why should I tolerate her insults and accusations? I don't want to be involved with them, even at weddings or funerals. It's time to sever ties. With that decision made, I cut off contact with both Robert and Karen. Robert was taken aback and asked, "Why are you cutting ties?" I replied, "She made it clear she doesn't want me involved. If you're curious, ask her." I then blocked all communication from him. Even though my husband travels, I can still reach him when needed. Tired of hearing Karen's demands to leave, I discussed the situation with my husband, and we decided to move. Then, 6 months after cutting ties with both Karen and Robert, my phone suddenly rang. I didn't recognize the number, but when I answered, it was Karen. "Hey, Mill, why didn't you attend our wedding? It's ridiculous for the groom's parents not to show up," Karen exclaimed. I was taken aback and responded, "Excuse me, we severed ties, so why would I attend your wedding?" "Even though we cut ties, shouldn't you still attend our wedding?" she insisted. "I bet you thought more guests meant more gifts." Well, besides the groom's parents, if all other relatives, including his brother, were absent, it would definitely create an awkward atmosphere. "Did you do something, Mill? Did you tell everyone not to come to our wedding?" "That's absurd. The real insanity lies in your actions. Did you schedule your wedding after seeing George and Angela's invitation? Planning your wedding the day before your brother-in-law's is not just insane but also incredibly petty. Trying to overshadow your own brother is twisted." "Shut up. Robert is the eldest, so he'll inherit Dad's vast fortune and the house. Everything revolves around Robert, so it's only natural to prioritize him." I sighed deeply. Prioritizing Robert was never our mindset. My husband and I have always treated both Robert and George equally. If Robert perceives it differently, it's beyond our influence. Besides, my husband doesn't possess any vast inheritance, but I've heard Robert's father is a frequent traveler, seldom returning to the States. Could that imply he's a wealthy CEO or something similar? My husband is a photographer. He earns decently, but nowhere near what a big CEO might make. If you married Robert for money, you might be disappointed. However, Robert does work for a reputable company, so financially, you may be secure in that regard. Karen seemed momentarily speechless and retorted, "Whatever, Robert and I have a lovely home without you anyway. P.S. Regarding the house, I've put it up for sale and changed the locks. If you were planning to move in after your wedding, you might want to reconsider." "You sold it," Karen exclaimed. "Yes, since Robert isn't the owner, he can't live there." "Then give us a house, even now," Karen demanded. "Please come to our wedding. Let's discuss this properly. Your wedding is in New York City, correct?" "Yes, that's right. We're currently in Hawaii, so unfortunately, we won't be able to make it. By the time we could arrive, your ceremony would be over." Interestingly, George and Angela's wedding took place in Hawaii. It was their dream to have a Hawaiian wedding, so we flew in the day before. You'd think Robert and Karen would have known that since they received the invitation. I ended the call as Karen began to cry on the other end and immediately blocked her. It's unbelievable that they would reach out after cutting ties with us. While we were celebrating George's wedding, Robert and Karen seemed to be causing drama back in the States. 3 months after we returned, Karen showed up at my new place. "Hey, Mill, I heard you gave 5 houses to George's wife. Why didn't you give us anything?" "Well, you called me a parasite and wanted me out, remember? We severed ties, so we're basically strangers now. I don't give anything to strangers." It appears Karen finally realized that the main source of income wasn't my globe-trotting photographer husband but rather myself. She had foolishly severed ties with someone who had inherited or purchased properties worth $3 million. "Now you want to mend fences and live together," Karen suggested. "No thanks. I have no interest in supporting strangers," I replied firmly. "Besides, my uncle and his wife have offered to take you both in." "I heard you quit your job assuming Robert had money, and Robert resigned due to fallout from the wedding, right?" "Well, if both of you are unemployed and have terminated your apartment lease, they've offered assistance because they need workers for their farm in Nebraska." "Wait, is that your pickup truck outside?" I let them know you were coming. As I glanced toward the front door, someone approached, so I hurried to open it. Karen was close behind, shouting, "No, I don't want to go. I love city life." But with no job, it was impossible for her to afford living in an expensive city like New York. Eventually, tear-streaked and disheveled, Karen was taken away by my aunt and uncle. They were pleased to have an extra pair of hands around, and they managed to find accommodations for both Robert and Karen. I felt a sense of relief, knowing I had done the right thing. By the way, the reason I gave Angela 5 houses was because I trusted she would manage them well. I started with 5 as a trial. We're considering living together in the future, and I believe we'll continue to get along, so I decided to entrust them to her. After some time, Robert called the landline. "Mom, I'm thinking of divorcing Karen. She's terrible at cooking and cleaning, but insists that since she does household chores and works, I should respect her and give her more money. She even says awful things like she did me a favor by marrying an older, unambitious guy like me and that I should support her." He pleaded for help. I'm aware of their situation as I have been in touch with my aunt and uncle. Last month, we found out Karen's pregnant, so divorce probably won't be approved. "You're going to be a father," I responded firmly. "With a child on the way, you need to step up." I hung up the phone. Despite their issues, it seems they're staying together. I've decided to distance myself from them moving forward. They need to take responsibility for their decisions and figure things out on their own.